I hope you're finding the day really interesting and that you've learned quite a lot today. So in my talk, hopefully you're going to learn about how to improve your emotional well-being. So I'm going to give you some top tips about how to do that. So my name is Laura Renshaw-Vuillier. I'm a lecturer and a researcher here at Bournemouth University, doing research on emotions and eating disorders. And today in my talk, I'm going to be, for the first time ever, actually, talking about my personal experience with an eating disorder. So I'm going to be talking about that to give you some tips as well about what I learned along the way and how to help someone with an eating disorder, what was important for me. And then going to give you some, some top tips about emotional well-being, what I mean by that, and what you can do to better regulate your emotions. And then lastly, I'm going to talk about the research, the really exciting research that we do here at Bournemouth University. Is that my water? Yeah, I think it is. Thank you. So this is my journey. So about 10 years ago, pretty much to the day actually, it was in May 10 years ago, I sought help for my eating disorder. So at the time, I had just moved to the UK in Cambridge. I was about to start my PhD, but I was also working as a research assistant, and it was an unpaid position, so I was also working as a waitress. And it was meant to be 2 part-time jobs, but it ended up being 2 full-time jobs. And now, with hindsight, I realised that that is probably what triggered my eating disorder to become a bit over control, and I was not able to control my eating disorder anymore, and I could not really think, I could not really work, I couldn't really do anything. And this is when I realised that I think I needed some help. So the symptoms actually started about 6 years before that, but for the 6 years before I sought help for my eating disorder, I think I was just thinking that it was just normal, it was just something that everyone was going through, and everyone was struggling with their emotions, and everyone was struggling with their eating in some ways and their self-esteem. And I didn't really think that I had a real problem until really that was consuming all my life, and that was all I could think about. And so this is when I asked for help. So I was really lucky that my GP took me seriously and referred me to a hospital where I got diagnosed with bulimia nervosa. So after that, I received CBT treatment, and so it was group CBT. And I'm really grateful for that because I think it really helped me understand how my emotions were linked to my eating behaviours. So it really helped me pinpoint to what was my triggers, and it was really kind of stress and anxiety were my main triggers for my eating disorder behaviour. And CBT really helped me understand this relationship, and also have a better relationship with food in general, and have meal planning, etc. was also part of the recovery. So throughout my recovery, it was slow pace, but slowly I got better, a few steps back. But generally speaking, I was slowly getting better. It was getting more under control. Still some eating disorders, thoughts and behaviour, but generally speaking, much better. So much that about 3 years after I received treatment, I thought that I was ready to help. And I thought I had been really lucky to receive help, and I thought it was my time now to help people. So I helped design and create an eating disorder support group at the University of Cambridge. And it was all good and exciting at first, but after a while, just listening to all these people talking about their eating disorder, I sort of realised that what I had done in my recovery was just kind of put a plaster on all the symptoms, but actually not properly deal with them. And so that was an occasion to actually properly deal with the symptoms that were really bothering and creating my eating disorder. So I stopped the group, but fortunately the other people that were in the group continued, so it means that the student could still receive some support. But at the time I was doing my PhD on emotion regulation, so I think that helped me as well, learning a lot of literature, plus reusing all the CBT skills that I had learned to better control my emotions. And I'm going to get to there in the next few slides to explain really what I mean by controlling and regulating emotions. But so slowly I got a bit better up to the time where it was time to finish my PhD. Once again, I don't know how that happened, but I ended up doing 2 full-time jobs at the same time. So finishing the PhD and also working as a postdoc. And once again, sort of like I could feel that the stress and anxiety and feeling that my life was not really manageable. I had too much to do, it was too much. I didn't really have control. And I could see myself sort of like, again, sort of like falling back into a pattern of using my eating disorder behavior to regulate my emotions and control my environment that was at the time felt really uncontrollable. But fortunately, it's also around that time that I met my partner, who is now my husband. And as it happens, he was also going through some difficult time, and so he was also finishing his PhD. His dad had just been diagnosed with cancer, and he died on that same year, so he was also really struggling. But somehow we sort of like really supported each other, and you know, as Amy talked in her talk and about how social support is so important, and emotional support, and he's been absolutely wonderful in being real emotional support and kind of like helping me to accept my emotions and deal with them a lot better. At the time, my postdoc also was on well-being and emotional well-being. So again, I think my work kind of really helped me understand better about emotions and how to regulate them. So that was about 5 years ago, and I think since then I can say that I'm fully recovered. I don't have any eating disorder thoughts or behaviour, and here I am then talking to you about that, and so clearly things are better. But so it was quite good until 2 years ago I fell pregnant, which was pretty good news, apart from the fact that I got diagnosed with hyperemesis gravidarum. I don't know if you know about that, but that's an extreme form of morning sickness. That meant that I was vomiting all the time, like up to 10 times a day. I could not keep any food down. I lost a lot of weight, and somehow it really felt like I was back into having an eating disorder. So I knew that I was not back and I had dealt with all the issues with my eating disorder, but somehow my brain tricked me into thinking that I had an eating disorder while I was having my eating disorder again. Sort of like losing all this weight and being all the vomiting and all being obsessed about food. And this time it was quite different because I was obsessed about needing to eat something to protect my daughter. But not being able to eat anything because everything was making me really nauseous. So that was interesting again. But then I got given some medication to control the vomiting, and so that helped me put on weight and then feeling a bit less anxious about the fact that, yeah, my daughter would be fine, I would be fine, and eventually got better, and I now have a 16-month-old who's wonderful, so that's good. And yeah, so now here I am, fully ready to help. I've dealt with everything, and I think the main part that I've dealt with is more my emotions. And now I don't let my emotions get to me as they used to do. I used to suppress my emotions and not really wanting to get there. And as Amy talked this morning, suddenly what happens, pressure cooker, everything explodes. And so now I'm like so much better at dealing with my emotions as they arrive. And so I want to share some tips about how I managed to do that, and yeah. But first, some top tips about eating disorder specifically. Seek help, and this is really important. For me, for 6 years before I decided to seek help, I just thought that that was just normal, but sort of like in the back of my mind, I still thought maybe I do have a problem, but it is part of eating disorders not acknowledging that you actually have a problem. But I would say that the biggest part of my recovery was really to seek help, and this is really important. If you're caring for someone who you suspect may have an eating disorder, do talk to them and do try and see whether they could talk to their GP or someone to try and get some help. Get support from friends, family and partner. So people usually find it hard to rely on other people, and you don't want to be a burden and you don't want to bother people with all your problems. But I'm pretty sure that I wouldn't be here today talking about all of that the way I am today if it hadn't been for support from my friends and my husband. So really do get support and don't feel like you're a burden to your friends. If they're your friends and family, you will not feel like you're a burden. Accept that recovery can take many forms and relapsing does not mean you'll never get there. So I think it took me, well, from the time I asked for help and the time I've considered myself recovered, it took me 5 years with a few step backs. And I think that's something really common in recovery, is that it can take many different forms, and relapsing does not mean you'll never get there. It does take time, but you can get there eventually. Don't be too hard on yourself and be proud of who you are. You're doing wonderfully. So that doesn't really just apply to people with eating disorders, but it is still stigmatized to talk about mental health, but also an eating disorder is still very stigmatized. And I'd say that you shouldn't be scared of talking about your problems and talking about the fact that you have an eating disorder, and dealing with that is something huge, and you should actually be quite proud to discuss that and to be proud of who you are, whatever walk of life you're coming from. Know your triggers. So for me, emotions were definitely my triggers, and so know them and try to, deal with them. And this is where it gets me to emotional well-being, and do take care of your emotional well-being. So how to do that? So first, a little bit about emotions. So in our society, we tend to be all about positive thinking, and positive emotions are the way to go. We should always feel just positive emotions. That's how to be happy. And on the other hand, you've got negative emotions that are like the devil and should be avoided at all cost. How to do that? It's very simple. You just have to stay positive. If you're not too sure how to stay positive, you can buy books. There's loads of books on self-help to help you with some positive thinking. If after that book you're still not too sure how to get there, you can also buy another book which gives you 9 steps to a happy you. And if that wasn't enough, you can also buy this book, Happiness Now, because frankly, who has the time to waste on feeling unhappy? Well, spoiler alert, I'm telling you right now, negative emotions are actually really important. And people who would say that they're feeling only positive emotions, it's probably impossible. B, if it is a case, it's probably really unhealthy, meaning that they are suppressing all their negative emotions. And that is because negative emotions are part of life. And we all experience negative emotions. And there's nothing wrong about experiencing negative emotions. It's how you deal with them that is the big deal. And this is called emotion regulation. So what is emotion regulation? First, I'm going to start with what emotion regulation is not. Emotion regulation is not pretending to be happy when you're not. This is called suppression. I'm suppressing all my negative emotions, putting them on the side, putting a brave face. I'm okay, everything's cool, no problem. This is not emotion regulation. Emotion regulation is about being aware of your emotions. So trying to understand and be curious about your emotions. This is also what Amy talked about in her talk. And try and be curious about, what's going on inside me? How do I feel? Do I feel hot and flushed? Is my heart beating really fast? Do I feel like butterfly in my stomach? So trying to be a bit in touch with your physiology. How is your body responding? What is the context? So what's happening around you? And trying to be aware of how you may be feeling. Second part about emotion regulation is also about accepting emotions. So all emotions are okay to experience, and I will never say that enough, to be honest, because I think for a lot of people, it's like, you're told that you shouldn't feel this way, but it's not what people mean. It's like you shouldn't act this way, but you should feel however you're feeling, and it's okay to feel angry or to feel frustrated or to feel anxious or to feel sad. This is part of life. It's how you deal with it, which is using strategies. So this is what I'm I started telling my daughter already. So she's starting biting people at nursery. So I do tell her again and again that it's okay to be frustrated because someone just took your toy, and it's completely fine. What's not okay though is the behavior that you act, and it's not okay to bite your friends. And so I think this is really important actually to start already now and to just say, rather than say, no, don't do that, explaining that it's not the emotion that's bad, it's actually the behaviour that we don't want to encourage. And so there are different strategies. So some people, for instance, when they feel sad, they may decide to go for a walk or listen to some music that makes them a bit happier. It's all going to be dependent on the context, on the different emotions, and also on the person. So for one person, it works really well to go for a walk. It does not mean that it's going to work really well for you. And I think this is a danger of self-help books who talked about the easy recipe for happiness, because everyone is so busy that they want really easy recipe for happiness. But the thing is, like, it's impossible to give, because all strategies are different based on the person, on the experience, and it comes with a few trial and error to see what actually works for you to regulate your emotions. So these are my top tips about emotional well-being. First is try to identify your emotions and be aware of them. So try to connect a bit more with your body and try to kind of like look at your physiology and see how you're feeling inside yourself and look at the context and what's happening. So I'm saying that, but by saying that also, it's quite easy then to kind of identify your emotions and go into a cycle of rumination. So you're like, oh, like I'm really angry, like Amy was talking earlier about someone who was angry because they were asked to eat. And so rumination would be, oh, I'm really angry at that right now, I really don't want to eat. And this is not what I mean. I mean like about identifying and taking sort of like a third person perspective, looking at the output and looking at the context. Well, this person wants me to eat for me to get better, but also I'm allowed to be angry. It's okay to be angry because I don't want to eat. But sort of like trying to take a step back and see what is the situation and try and identify then your emotions based on that. Label them. So there's something called emotional differentiation. So some people, when they talk about their emotions, they're going to say, oh, I'm feeling really good today, or I'm feeling really bad today. But the bad could mean that they're feeling sad or anxious or angry, but they just don't discriminate between them. They're just saying, oh, I feel bad today. And something that's really important, and the next slide is going to be about some research that I've done about emotional differentiation. So this being able to differentiate and to label different emotions is something really important, being able to pinpoint exactly what emotion you're feeling. And this is linked to increased well-being, and I'll show you later about what this is linked to. And try to learn new words. I actually have a book, but it's in my bag over there, so never mind. But I've got a book about, it's a sort of like dictionary about emotions, and so my husband got me that. And I thought it was actually really thoughtful, because it's like showing how you can learn new words every day, new emotional words, and by learning new emotional words, then you can better pinpoint exactly how you're feeling, and that could be a good exercise for you to do to try and discover new emotions that you may not know about. Accept them. So it is okay to say that it's tough sometimes, and we all find it tough sometimes. And so this is opposed to suppressing them. And I know this is really easy to suppress emotions, and particularly when you've been used to do that all your life, and to just kind of put that on the side and just be like, oh, I feel a bit some negative emotion, but I can't get there, it's just too messy, it's just too much. But actually, if you go back to the identifying and labeling them, then it doesn't feel like these big beasts of like bad and negative feelings. It's just one emotion and one at a time. And then this is, or hopefully the steps of identifying and labeling emotions are going to make it much easier for you to accept them rather than suppress them, because suppression has been linked to actually feeling much more negative emotions. So when you're trying to suppress your emotions, then you tend to feel them with even more intensity. So I think this is what Danny was talking about. Try not to think about a pink elephant or a blue elephant. Try not to think about that. The only thing you think about right now is that pink or blue elephant. Well, this is the same as emotions. When you're trying to suppress them, all in all, that is just not working, because this is all you think about. So try to accept them is something that could help you to have better emotional well-being. And find ways that work for you. So again, try and error. What works for you may not work for everyone, but trying to see what works for you to regulate your emotion, what strategies work. And it may be different for each emotion and in each different context. And if you're not used to it, this is going to take a few, try and error, but hopefully that's going to help you deal with the behaviour and deal with the emotions by still kind of them being part of your everyday life. So now let's look at some research on emotional differentiation. So here we've got person A and person B. Let's just say that they both experience 5 emotions throughout the day. So person A is feeling happy, 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 and grateful. Person B is feeling happy, sad, anxious, grateful, and in awe. Yeah, so this is some research that I did during my postdoc. So we looked at emoticons as a way to look at emotional expression, because we looked in this data in like loads and loads of people, so we needed a quick way of looking at emotional expression. And we asked them to chat with a partner that they hadn't met before. And what we found is that the people who used just positive emotions, they reported after the chat to be less happy and less satisfied with their lives than the people who use positive, neutral, and negative emotions. That is about how expressing a wider diversity of emotions is linked to increased happiness and satisfaction with life. What's really cool as well is that then we looked at the world level. So we looked at individual level first, and then at the level of the world. So we have a lot of data about happiness around the world and satisfaction with life around the world. And so we looked at what each of these countries as a whole, the people living in these countries used. And what we found is that the people in the countries using a higher amount and diversity of emotions, that was linked to increased happiness in these countries as well. So it's not just at the level of the individual, we could replicate this finding at the country level, which was really exciting. Now, more research about emotional differentiation. So emotional differentiation has been linked to higher levels of well-being, has been linked to protection against maladaptive strategies such as binge drinking, aggression, and self-injurious behaviour. It hasn't been looked at in eating disorders yet, and this is what I'm doing at the moment. And has been linked to experiencing less severe anxiety and depressive disorders, and all in all, better emotion regulation skills. So now quickly a little bit about the research, the exciting research that we do here at Bournemouth University. So I don't know if you got the chance to talk to Sam Sewell, my master's student, so they were piloting a project that has just received a grant with Amy Harrison to look at emotional processing and regulation in bulimia nervosa using electroencephalography. So it's using EEG as a kind of like more objective way of looking at their emotions, sort of like whether they have difficulties regulating their emotions or not, and better understanding what's happening in their brain. Then I also I'm doing some exciting research with my colleague Rachel Mosley and 2 master students, Zoe Carter and Rita. And so we're looking at the relationship between autism and eating disorders. So I can't remember who asked a question during Amy's presentation about whether there's a link between autism and eating disorders, because some of the symptoms seem to be quite similar. And so, yeah, it has been found that there is higher rates of high rates of autism and eating disorders, particularly anorexia nervosa. And what we found in our research is that alexithymia, which is difficulties in identifying and describing feeling, explain this relationship. So it's really interesting we did that in kind of like as a trait in the population. And what we want to do is replicate our findings. And if we could find that, then that could explain, we could see whether that could be a good way of helping people who have both co-occurring diagnosis, because people who also have autism, people with eating disorder who also have autism, do not respond well to typical treatment for anorexia nervosa. So it's really important to better diagnose them. And so if we could see that actually having high level of alexithymia is a risk factor to then developing anorexia nervosa, that could be really important for future research and patients and treatment. I'm also doing this project on eating disorders and pregnancy with my students Mira, who presented a poster earlier. Is she here? No, she's not. And so when I was pregnant and I felt that I was sort of like reliving some of my symptoms, of course I went online and I looked at all the different research articles that there was on eating disorders and pregnancy, and there was not much actually. And this is sort of like what her project showed as well, is that there is not much support that's being offered, and there is definitely need for more research to better understand whether symptoms get better or worse or stay the same, and to better support people with an eating disorder and going through pregnancy. I also had another project this year on emotion in orthorexia nervosa. So I don't know if you've heard of orthorexia nervosa, but it's not yet diagnosed as an eating disorder, but it's more about eating righteous food, eating the right food, so focused on eating healthy food rather than no food, which you would see in anorexia nervosa. But there are very strong similarities, because people with orthorexia nervosa, they're so focused on eating the right food that all in all they end up restricting their eating quite a lot. And so I was interested to see whether we know that people with eating disorders do have difficulties identifying and describing their emotions as well as regulating them. And interestingly, we didn't find this pattern in orthorexia nervosa, just showing that this sort of like different mechanisms with this potential eating disorder. And finally, so I'm looking at emotional awareness and diversity, and I'm going to start as well doing a project next year with Restored, our local eating disorder charity, to better explore this really fascinating research about emotional diversity. So thank you for your time.